position is, if you guys have seen me on Twitter, yeah, you can find Brody Nate at Brody Nate Twitter. That's my Twitter handle. I have a lot of conservative friends who don't believe this COVID thing is real. And to me, I just don't understand why. Like, I don't understand why. Like, first, let me go back to like a week ago. So I'm hanging out with a couple of friends. Now we're on a Zoom call. What happens is that I have a couple of friends from law school who want to start a firm. Now we're all a whole bunch of black guys. There's five of us, and we want to start a firm. So we're just going over whether we're going to start a firm or not. And one of the guys had asked, we were talking about face masks. So we got to a conversation about face masks. Then so after talking to them, I go and speak to another friend of mine who happens to be a doctor from New Jersey, straight Trump supporter. So he's telling me that, him and his lawyer is going to sue. So he brings his lawyer up. So now the lawyer comes on because the lawyer is available. So I'm talking to him and the lawyer's like, I'm telling you, this is illegal. It's unconstitutional to force people to wear masks. So I'm like, why do you think it's unconstitutional to force somebody to wear a mask? It doesn't make any sense to me. So he's telling me all this, right? And then he's telling me all this about freedom of expression. The government can't force you to wear a mask. This is ridiculous. How can the government force you to wear a mask? Then he goes and he starts disproving other statements. Like he starts saying, well, people are saying, the government can force you to wear a seatbelt, but that's only unlimited when I'm driving a car, so the seatbelt is a bad argument. So he goes through his whole thing, right? This whole thing about how masks are unlawful against the United States Constitution. So we go through the whole thing. So after he finishes, he says, so you agree with me? My argument's good. And I said, no, I think this is one of the worst arguments I've heard for this thing, to be honest with you. He gets upset. He says, why? So I says, well, the government forces people to wear clothing all the time. It's forcing me to wear clothing now, right? It forces, if I want to go to the supermarket, I got to wear clothes. But specifically, I have to wear loin coverings. What does that mean? I got to wear something to cover my private areas. Now, what those private areas are determined by locality, right? If you're in New York, we have the Free the Nipple campaign, so women can walk out bare-chested just like men, but you still have to have something covering your loins. Your private areas down there, your buttocks and genitalia. And that's the law. Anything, if you don't wear that, you will be arrested for indecent exposure, right? The law says you must wear something covering your loins. So you could just wear a bikini bottom, but you have to have some type of loin covering on, right? You are being forced. And the reason why they force you to wear a loin covering is to protect other people's eyes, right? Indecency. They want to protect my eyes from your loins. So if I say wear a mask to protect my life from a disease, I think that's a stronger argument than protecting my eyes from your loins. So so when I explained it to him that way, he blew up on me. He's like, oh no, it's different. So I said, well, just tell me how it's different. How is it different than you wearing coverings on your loins versus covering on over your face? I don't know. It just, a mask is just another piece of clothing that you're being required to wear if you're going to be out in public. That's just what it is. Final thought. Nobody told me there'd be days like this, strange days. Yeah. Off. I do want to ask most of you. Most people in the United States don't realize they are living in the worst case scenario. And that's the scary part about this whole COVID thing. Now I'm transitioning to COVID. Most people in the United States don't realize they are living in the worst case scenario for COVID-19. If you live in the United States, you are in the worst case scenario. I understand when you're living through the disaster, you don't really realize that you're in the middle of the storm, But the United States, if you're living in the United States, you are living in an apocalyptic situation when it comes to COVID-19. And I didn't realize how bad it was. I really did not realize how bad the situation is. think about this. At the beginning of this month, we were at something like almost 2 million cases. We're almost at 4 million now. We almost had 1 million new people infected before the end of this month, during this month. That is crazy, crazy. So I want to show you something. It's weird because I know you guys are going to probably say, Nate, you're too much of a stupid nerd, but it's true. I am a nerd, and I'm going to show you guys this this PowerPoint presentation I had done. Now, at the beginning of the pandemic, I was like, you know what, this is something that people may be interested in. So I said, you know what, I'll do a presentation on COVID and, you know, my thoughts about COVID. So I did a real deep dive into COVID, a real deep dive, and it just got, Onyx, what's going on, baby? How you doing? And it had got so it just got so much. I was like, oh my God, you know, how far am I going to go with this thing? Let me share this. So what I started doing was just like every day, I started documenting what was going on in the government. So I was just going through the news reports, getting on this. This is my man Onyx. What's up, Onyx? Good to see you, man. I wonder when we get a second, I got to talk to you. I'm gonna send you a message, bro. So I just started doing this huge deep dive into COVID. So what I did was, so you guys can see what this is. Country, let me do this view. This. So what I did was I said, well, country A and country B are the United States and South Korea. In South Korea, they both got their cases on the same day, right? And this was showing how, and I did this in April. So this was showing how the United States was lagging behind in testing. But one thing that I started doing was just trying to understand what the hell all this virus stuff was. So I started doing this research into what was going on about, you know, what this whole social distancing, what were they trying to do to stop the virus? So this is what I found. I found that mitigation to stop people from getting infected, it's all about exposure. And you can do it two ways. You can eliminate exposure. That's by isolating people, right? But if you isolate people, then you starve the virus. That's essentially what you're doing. The virus can't get to new victims. So if you tell everybody, stay inside for 14 days, then each one of those people, the virus goes through its cycle, and now you've starved the virus of new victims. So that's eliminate exposure. The second is if you're exposed, then to make sure that exposure for the virus doesn't turn into an infection. So that's the whole washing your hands. So when you see it, when you talk about eliminate exposure, that's the 6 feet apart, right? My viral particles are too far away from you for you to get infected. And stay at home, the isolation effect. If I'm isolated from sick people, then I couldn't get the virus. These are very simple measures. That's what the lockdowns do. That's why the lockdowns are the most effective way to stop a virus from spreading, because you starve the virus from new victims. And then when you talk about exposure, you don't want those. If you were exposed, if you touched the surface, if someone sneezed on your hand or something, you don't want that exposure to turn into an infection. So they tell you to wash your hands, washing your hands and all this other stuff. So this is what I was learning in trying to understand, like, the differences just between the differences in what they're telling us to do with both stay-at-home orders and what they're telling us to do to not turn, if we're exposed, to stop that exposure from turning into an infection. So in learning all this stuff. Now, again, this was in April. So this is me just going through, just trying to understand this stuff and understand why the government was telling us to do all this stuff. But I started looking at COVID-19 mobility reports. Now, for all of you who don't know, what Google started doing was allowing just regular people to go and to see how people in a community were moving around, right? If you were staying home, if you were going to the parks, it's to be honest with you, this piece of this research actually scared me to death, because it showed me how much information about my own whereabouts that I was giving up to a private company like Google. It's pretty sick. But in a situation like this, when you're talking about a pandemic, you really get to see, how technology can help us stop the spread of this virus. Check this out, which I think is fascinating. So this is the United States. And as you can see, this is when when Trump initially started in March, when they did the stay-at-home order. Now, what you can see, this is for retail and recreation. So this is people in the United States based on, this is Google. So how do you get this data? Just so I can go back. All your cell phones that have GPS on them, whenever you turn the GPS on or you leave it on, they get that data from your GPS on your devices. Most people can't even turn them off, to be honest with you. So that's how they get this data. And they have this data for every country on the planet that has cell phone service and GPS. So this is how they're tracking you. So they can tell, the percent of population, the percent of people with Google phones, even Apple phones or whatever, who do this. It's a lot of information. So this, and I can give you the link to get this information, the most current information. But this was in April. So I had done this in April. I'd done this research in April, and I still have all that stuff. So check this out. So this mobility report tells you retail and recreation. So it says the United States is down. This was in March, how we were down 47% because we had a stay-at-home order. As you can see, there's a baseline, which you would see where people would be on the average time. And then you see the decrease when it's under the baseline. So we're down 47%. And we were down to 47%, and that was March 16th. And on March 16th, that was a stay-at-home order. So you see the dramatic drop in people going to retail and recreation. And here's South Korea. Now, in South Korea, they didn't start until they started early. They started February 20th. So the United States started about a month later than South Korea. Now, mind you, both South Korea and the United States had their first COVID case on the same day. But South Korea started their reduction a lot earlier than the United States. Their stay-at-home order. So people were staying at home a lot earlier in South Korea than they were in the United States. So you had these two countries, 1 month, just 1 month difference. When we look at them together, so here's South Korea. This is when they started. Now, if you look at all of them, transit stations, workplaces, all of these days, this is when they had their dramatic drop in mobility. People were staying at home, and you can see it throughout their data. The United States, you can see it throughout their data too, but it's later on. You can see how at the beginning it was, it was just baseline. People were still doing their doing, and then it's dramatic shift downwards in most. And if you see down here at the bottom, I don't know if you can see residential. If you look on the left-hand side of the screen at the bottom, you'll see residential. How residential increased because people were staying at home more. But if you compare the United States when they started to South Korea, you have that moment in time where South Korea started, the United States didn't start. So here it is on the map. That comes out to, when I did this was April 12th. That difference, because of exponential growth, was the difference between 10,000 cases and 500,000 cases in the United States. That 1 month time frame when the United States didn't shut down, how they waited so long, when I took this is a snapshot in time. South Korea had 10,000 cases, and the United States had over 500,000 cases at that point. That's what the difference was. And now, today, that difference is even worse than this. Today, you would think that South Korea, what was the difference today? Sorry, I had a lot of charts here. 500. So when I did this chart, the United States had 5,000 cases, 500,000 cases, and South Korea had about 10,000 cases, 200 dead. U.S. had 20,000 dead. Today, the U.S. has 3.6 million cases, 140,000 people dead. South Korea only has 14,000 cases and 300 dead. That's what it is today. It's shocking how they have changed the game so much, and we have gone so bad. How do you have such a dramatic difference between two countries that both got their same cases on the same day? I don't know. It seems insane from where we are to where we're at. And just, these little things. So this was my deep dive into COVID-19 and to try to figure out, what the hell is going on with the United States response. It just didn't make sense. So I had a lot of my conservative friends start coming to me and telling me, well, Nate, you know, lockdowns don't work, right? Lockdowns don't work because, and I think most of them say lockdowns don't work because they just don't understand science. If you isolate people, then the virus can't get to them. Lockdowns, you know, of course they work. They work because it's just simple. If the virus can't infect you, if you can isolate populations from the virus, then the virus can't spread. You know, it's literally that. So one of the most interesting things that I keep people saying, well, look at Sweden, look at these other countries, look at how they're doing, right? And how the United States would be doing even better if we didn't lock down, right? So I said, well, you know what? I'm like a super nerd, right? You guys come to me because I'm a super nerd. So I did the math. I said, well, you know what? Let's do the effing math. You know, it's easy to do. So let me show you. I literally did the math, and I can show you. I can honestly show you. I can compare each country on the planet to the United States, and then determine whether the numbers would look like if the United States was growing or growing at the rate of those other countries. First, let me show you how I got there. I'm probably going to bore you to death with this stuff, but let me show you how I got how I'm going to do this, because I think it's more important for me to show you how we get there than where we're at. Hold on. So this is what, now again, this is me just making it, trying to explain how I'm going to present the data that I'm going to show you about comparing the United States to Sweden, to South Korea, to all these countries, how we got there. So, oops, let me go here. Okay, screen share. Let me screen share this so you guys can see it. You're going to be shocked when you see the actual numbers compared to each other, but I want just to show everybody how we got there first before. So we're all on the same page. Chrome tab. All right, here it is. All right, let me change this view to present. All right. So let's say we have these two countries, right? Country A on the right, that looks like a leaf, and then country B. Country A on the left, country B on the right. So they both have 5,000 cases, but they have different populations. One has 10,000 and one has 5,000. So if you want to get the rates of infection for the population, you just divide 5,000 cases versus the population, and you get a number. In country A, that number is 50%. So 50% of the population, or 0.5%, 50% of the population, or 0.5, is infected. And the other country, even though they have the same amount of cases, they only have 0.25 or 25% infection rate. So if you want to see how country B would look if they had the same infection rate as country A, then you would just multiply the 0.5 times the population, or the 50% times the population, and you get the number of cases they would have if they were country A, which here would be 10,000 cases. So it's a difference. So if country B had the same cases, as they had the same rate of infection as country A, they would have 10,000 cases. So now you know that country B is actually doing better than country A, based on just based on the rate of infection. So that's what. So I applied this same concept to the United States, right? Instead of country B, I just said, okay, well, what's the United States cases and what's their population? And then got their rate of infection. And then said the same thing with South Korea. You know, here is their cases, here's their population, and got their rate. Then when you did the same thing, I just took their rate of infection, multiplied it times the population, same thing I did before. And this is how many cases the United States would have if we were South Korea. 84,000 cases. That's instead of the 3.6 million we have now, but that was instead of the 2.9 million cases that we had now. We would only have 84,000 cases. That's the difference if you adjusted it for population. And this is how it looks on the map. So I'm hoping everybody understands how I'm getting those numbers. I'm just taking the rates and apply I'm taking out the population. So I'm adjusting for the population. Now I did that. Now obviously you see how I did that, just that one. Now I can do that for all countries, and I did. So let me show you how I do. Let me show you what that looks like. Let's see what that actually looks like. And the math is simple, right? The math, it just is. So here we go with my Excel spreadsheet. So first thing, I went to World Meter. Let me make sure you guys can see me still. So the first thing, I went to World Meter and I downloaded all their data. So this is data for everything, every country on the planet with their numbers. And these numbers were active from yesterday. So I looked at all their numbers and downloaded all their numbers. So these are all the numbers, all the current numbers. Then I created a quick data list and I sorted the countries I wanted. I had the countries that did a full lockdown versus the countries that did, I know for a fact, that didn't do any lockdown. So Sweden and Brazil, no lockdown, even though Brazil started locking down now. And then countries that did a full lockdown, right? And I picked Norway because Norway's next door to Sweden. Sweden, no lockdown. Norway, which is right next door, did a full lockdown. So we get to see those two numbers compared to each other too. So the first thing I did was just take the output and I said, okay, here's the US and here's New Zealand. And then I did the same math that we did before. So here it is. And we have the USA on top. Now, if I just put USA, let's say, for instance, versus USA, you see how all the charts are the same. All the numbers are the same. They're equal. You got no more cases, no more deaths. Everything is equal. So what these charts are going to do is going to adjust whatever country that I choose. It's going to adjust that country, the numbers from that country, to see if the US was, let's say, South Korea, how the US numbers would look if our rates of infection, if our death rate, if our cases were the same as South Korea's or Italy's, for instance. Again, this is just adjusting the numbers for population. So the first thing, let's look at Brazil. So if the US was Brazil, we would have 500,000 less cases and 21,000 less deaths, and our death rate would be identical. So even though US, people are saying Brazil is worse, Brazil is actually doing better, even though slightly, than the United States. We'd essentially be in the same place, but you'd have 500,000 less deaths. I mean, 500,000 less cases and 21,000 less deaths. Again, this is just adjusting for population, right? I'm hoping people. Let me make sure I'm not boring people to death with this stuff. All right. Any questions? Any questions? Any questions? No. People are okay with this, right? So okay. So this is it. So for Brazil, we look almost identical, right? It's not really anything too crazy. So now, does anybody? Let's look at Sweden. Should we go to Sweden right now, or should I tease it a little bit? Let's look at Canada first. Let's look at Canada. So if we were Canada, if we had the same cases, if we had the same rates of cases, the same rate of death, and the same death rate as if we I keep saying if we had the same, if we adjusted for population, Canada, we would have 2 million, almost 3 million less cases if we were Canada. We would have about 60,000 less deaths if we were Canada, but we would have double the death rate. So Canada's death rate is at 8%. So our death rate is less, but we have almost 3 million more cases and 63,000 more deaths, right? So Canada, compared to the United States, when it comes to death rate of death, is doing worse. But just overall, if we were Canada, we'd be in a lot better position. We'd almost have almost less than 1 million cases if we were Canada, adjusting everything for population. So this is what it is. So what's the next country you guys want to see? You guys want to see Sweden? Because everybody keeps saying, look at Sweden. Sweden is the way to go. Sweden is the best. So if we look at Sweden, how would the United States look if we were Sweden? If we were doing the same thing Sweden had done and had the same numbers as Sweden? Well, here's Sweden. If we were Sweden, we would have 1 million less cases, but we would have 42,000 more deaths. And we would almost double our death rate. So true, we would have less cases, about 1 million less cases, but we would have 42,000 more deaths if we were Sweden. So why people are saying that we should be like Sweden, I do not know. I don't understand why people are saying we should be more like Sweden, because we would have 42,000 more people dead if we were Sweden. So it seems like, matter of fact, if we were Sweden, I would say we'd be almost being identical for what we're doing right now, right? Sweden looks almost identical. Matter of fact, I think Sweden is actually worse. I would rather have more cases than more deaths. And as you can see, Sweden has a lot more deaths. So everybody who keeps going out there saying, look at Sweden, it's a success story, just hasn't looked at the numbers, just hasn't critically looked at, and that's why Fauci and the rest of them saying Sweden is no success story. Sweden is pretty much a failure when it comes to deaths. But then you'd say, well, what about Norway? Because don't forget, Norway was right next door to Sweden, and Norway did a full lockdown, right? And Sweden did not. So let's look at what Norway looks like when compared, if you adjust the U.S., if you adjust the numbers for population, what does it look like? Well, if we were Norway, we would have 3 million less cases. We'd have 125,000 less deaths, and we'd have a lower death rate. Again, if we were Norway. So this shows the country that locked down is doing so much better than a country that didn't. Again, here's Norway, and here is Sweden. See the difference? They're next door neighbors. Those countries are pretty much identical except for population. And when adjusted for population, you see the difference. Why are people saying we should be more like Sweden? We should be more like Norway. People should be screaming, why aren't we more like Norway? There'd be a lot less death and a lot less cases. Insane. I know. Insane. Let me look at the chat. Thank you. And hey, guys, if you don't forget, please let me know if you guys are enjoying this. Isn't that assuming that the cases that they result in death? No. These are taking this. What I'm doing is taking the actual deaths, right? The actual rates of deaths, the numbers of that now, and just adjusting them for population. So you can see if the numbers are adjusted for population, what the numbers would look like if it was based on the U.S. population. So that's what I'm doing. So this is actual deaths and just taking the rates and just changing. If you look a couple of seconds back, you'll see exactly how I'm doing the math. But that's essentially what all this is doing, adjusting the rates of cases and deaths based on population. Let me see. Sweden has a lot too much just because they were pretty much, they pretty much gave up on their elderly. But again, people keep saying we need to be like Sweden. And Sweden, that means they're saying we need to have 30% more deaths. That's what they're saying. We want to be like Sweden. We want to have 30% more deaths. Now, here's something that's very interesting. Italy. Look at Italy. Now, with Italy, we'd have 2.3 million less cases, but we'd have 50,000 more deaths. And look at the death rate in Italy. Death rate in Italy is astonishing. 14%. 14%. Italy is insane. Now, Italy locked down, right? But what happened with Italy? Look at those deaths. We'd have 50,000 more deaths with Italy. But what happened with Italy is that they had to run in the